Hi there, Frank Winston here for the Pacifica Historical Society, host of the weekly show Footprints of Pacifica, where we discover and explore the lure and the lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and its characters. This week's show focuses on Karl Baldwin as he reminisces not only on his life but his particular role as the first city manager of Pacifica. Welcome, Karl, and tell me, what brought you to Pacifica as a city manager? Obviously, you were appointed, but why did you decide this was the place to be in your career?
Well, I had previously been town manager down in Los Gatos, where I served for about 5 years. And along came Pacifica, which was a brand new city, just incorporating. And they put out a call for possible city managers. And Pacifica, to me, represented a great challenge of starting up a new city and getting it all organized. So I therefore applied, and that was what brought me to Pacifica.
Had you ever been to Pacifica at all, or you just saw a name on an invitation sheet?
I wasn't very familiar with Pacifica, except that my wife and I, when I was working in Los Gatos, took a trip up the coast, came to this settlement along the coast, took a left-hand drive drive onto what is now Morris Point Road, saw an old hotel back there, or a building that we presumed was a hotel, saw a subdivision under construction on the right, and in the middle of a foggy day, why, we realized that we were in a place where we probably didn't ever want to be again, and we remarked, who would ever want to live in a place like this?
And less than a year later, you were living there.
So that was my introduction to the area of Pacifica.
For the record, it was 1958, because the city was formed officially November 22, 1957. Right. So how long after that were you in place?
About 2 months later, as of the first of the year, while I was on the job.
Now, as I understand it, there's a new city, which not only meant you had problems of forming a city, but the county services were no longer. The minute you elected, the city elected to come in as a city, the coast side lost all the county services. So what did that mean to you as a city manager?
Well, we didn't lose all the services. We took on as many as we were capable of taking on at one time. The city became a city because people were generally dissatisfied with the overall level of services. So we immediately took on fire responsibilities, fire department, public works, and all that entailed. And then department by department, we put it together. We held off for a year on police while we made a special study. So bit by bit, we put it together.
You make reference to we. Show you a photograph. Brings you back some years.
Well,
you recognize some of those folks?
Yes, I do. These are largely members of the original city council. There's only one member alive today, that's Gene Fassler. And the other members, not all of whom are here, but here's George Mason, one of the first elected, Jerry Schumacher, and we're missing from this picture Don Miller and Harold Feige. And they'll turn up someplace else. But in any case, why, this was an early city members of the initial city council.
And what were the sources for revenue at that point? Was there any transition from the county? Did they give you the war chest that they had left over for the city of Pacifica?
Very little. We started off as a very poor city, and the first course of action the city council had to take was to enact a business license tax so they could pay the salaries. And they were waiting for the first installment of property taxes to come in from the county. But the business license tax tided us over, and we started business.
Give us a thought of transportation, either private or public during that time, the 58, 60, and so on.
Public transportation?
Yeah, what was available?
Well, the primary transportation to get to from the south and to San Francisco was Greyhound bus, and cars using the roads, which were not very good. At that time, the Hog Ranch Road at the north end, Sharp Park Road, which was in poor shape, they were the primary accesses, and the Pacificans got along as best they could under those circumstances.
We have a photo of the creation, I suppose, or the cutting ribbon at City Hall. back in the, what year was that?
This
they
was
created the City Hall?
this was shortly after incorporation, about 1959.
Was this an existing building, or did they take one over?
What you see here was a former school building.
Okay.
Our first City Hall was up in Pacific Manor, a little rented office building, just one-story thing, with three rooms. So we got out of that as quickly as you could, and fortunately, a local realtor, Ray Higgins, donated. He happened to own. He donated the former Sharp Park School to the city, provided that it should always be used as a city hall, nothing else. And on that basis, we accepted it, or the city council accepted it, and we went to work on making extensive revisions and repairs to the building. Just about everything had to be done, and it was done at a net total cost of $10,000
for the whole refurbishing?
For the whole works. And we moved in. The city council was downstairs in the basement, city offices upstairs, and that was the way we started off.
For reference of our townspeople, where is this today? What is it today?
Today it's still a city hall, but it's not in very good shape, and it will probably be phased out before too long.
But it's operating as a
operating
city.
Today.
So it has been continuously the location for the city hall?
Absolutely.
How about other services like the library? Was there a library at the time you started?
There were small libraries, one in Sharp Park and a small one later on down in Linamar Shopping Center. And then later on, while we were here, we constructed the library on Palmetto Avenue, and that's our largest library. And then later the second library was shifted to Sanchez location in the back of the valley.
What do you remember of the businesses in the 50s and 60s? What was there a principal kind of industry or commerce?
Well, it's been a city from its very beginning without an economic base of any consequence. We're completely without industry. We do have commerce, of course, in the form of is what are essentially neighborhood shopping centers. We don't have a regional shopping center of any sort that's comparable to those that are in the other peninsula cities. So when we were incorporated, a good bit of our businesses were located on either side of the highway before there was a freeway. So the Sharp Park area was the principal area there. Linamar Shopping Center had come into being, but at the time of incorporation there was no center in Sharp Park itself.
So if I see your picture in this, the Linamar Safeway, is that part of the shopping center?
Well, that was the Linamar Safeway came into being, and this was the ribbon cutting ceremonies, and some of our other council. This is Harold Feige, one of the council members, and here's Gene Fassler, and then there are key members of the business community, Baz Gladio, and Jim Fox, who ran the hardware, Mario Torregino ran the scavenger service. So a pretty good spread of business and city officials were there.
What was there in the way of agriculture during that time?
Agriculture had largely phased out by the time we were incorporated, because before incorporation, why, the Linamar area was covered with artichoke plants and Brussels sprouts, and they were phased out in favor of new homes. So I would say that largely agriculture was phased out at the time as Pacifica grew.
How was your term as city manager? Was that an indefinite or re-elected or reappointed every year? Did you have security in that regard?
The city manager was appointed by the city council and served at their pleasure. When I was there, not under any kind of a contract, but just on the basis of the will and pleasure of the city council. There's no term of office attached to city managership.
Some of the crises that we've known about in the last few years deal with weather. Did you ever have the floods and the storms or
anything? Yes, we did. We had
what happened during your time? I'm going to say on your watch. What happened?
Well, we had some very severe flooding, which flooded the entire lower part of Linamar and flooded right into the homes, so that people had to abandon the whole lower section of Linamar, the portion down opposite the shopping center. Was all inundated, and people had to get out by boat, and that was the worst situation that we faced initially.
Karl, in the 60s in San Francisco, there were many new movements, the hippies and the like. Did that get down here while you were on the watch?
I would say not appreciably.
Because you left about 66.
I left in 66, and I would say that the movements of the 60s did not impact heavily on our city at that time.
Can you share with us a little bit how you became available to be a city manager? What background, education in the Bay Area?
Oh, well, I had gone to college at College Pacific, and on leaving that, I joined the Navy.
That's in Stockton, and
yeah,
now the University
Stockton.
of Pacific.
Then
okay.
I went into the service for about 3 years, down to Samoa, and finally back into California. I was discharged in San Diego, and then I went to the University of California at Berkeley for postgraduate work in public administration. And
when you say postgraduate work, when you took a degree in Stockton, was that in public administration?
That
or
was
just
in
general?
political science,
Okay.
and closely related to that was public administration.
Okay, and then
Right.
after Berkeley?
And after Berkeley, I went to work for a private firm that was making studies of municipalities, universities, and so forth. And I traveled to several cities and areas of the country.
Today they'll call that a consultant. Were you then a consultant?
That's right.
Too? Okay.
That's right. It was a consultancy, and we conducted studies in various locations, Chicago, and Austin, Texas, and Newport News, and Baltimore, all over the place. And then at that time, I received an appointment as assistant to the city manager of San Mateo. I moved to the West Coast and started to work for a city.
That was before Los Gatos or before
That's
here.
right.
Now, I'm going to switch back to one more photo just to see what this brings back memory-wise as a city manager.
That's before I left Pacifica.
Yeah.
And this was the dedication of the preparation for a major drainage system to handle the Fairmont development. And these huge pipes are now underground, and they are draining the rain runoff for Fairmont.
When you talk about the Fairmont development, prior to the development, were there very few homes up there? Was it all agriculture, ranches?
Yeah,
what did you have up there?
Daly City had crept down to the boundaries of Pacifica with their homes, and their next move was to come over the hill, and it was Henry Dolger, a subdivider, who had developed much of Daly City, proposed developing in Pacifica. Initially, he wanted to develop on 33-foot lots. Pacifica bucked that and said, we're going to hold out for 50-foot lots. The standard lot in Pacifica will be 50 by 100. And Pacifica prevailed in that regard. So Fairmont was built on that basis.
And the difference is that Pacifica never did become another Daly City.
That's right.
By its choice, and then it maintained that choice.
We're
with a lot of votes
border at the north end.
But Fairmont had nothing up there at the time that Dolger went up there?
Nothing but homes. But the little homes on 33-foot lots. So their 33-foot lot homes are right up against our 50-foots today.
What was the impact on values of the homeowners, the former homeowners, and then those who came in under Dolger?
I would say that the homes that Dolger built in Pacifica were very stable and have held their value over many years, so that this added a very stable part to our community and a very valuable part to our community in terms of total assessed valuation.
One thing you may have an opinion on, I was always wondering, 9, 8, or 10, or 12 villages, whatever the community number is correct, came together by a 2,600 to 2,100 vote. What happened after that as far as the communities? Did they lose their character? Did they hate everybody else because the other towns didn't really have what they had? Was there rivalry, or did they meld together? How did you see it?
Much less than one would have expected. I would say that the communities more or less threw in their lot together, and there wasn't a huge competition. One reason being that there was a unified city council in the sense that there are 5 members of the council represented the entire city. No one had a particular district. Even though they might live there, why, they represented the entire city. That helped to pull it together. And it has never became a major problem of the matter of communities scrambling for their share of the pie.
And during those first few years, how about the schools? Did they spring up from all over because you had all this increased housing, so
There was a huge increase of population, particularly kids, and the number of schools went way up to, I think, 12 or 14 schools, and they were full up. And then 2 high schools came into the picture as well. And then successively, as the school populations have dropped over the years, and we're now down to a much lesser number. I think it's just 7 elementaries.
And the entire population, it peaked at 40,000 and still hasn't quite gotten up there. It's sort of in that neighborhood.
We're at I guess, just above 40,000. At one point in our history, why, we projected that the city had the land that potentially could develop a city of up to about 85 or 90,000.
That projection was made during your term as city council. City
it was
manager.
at that point, someplace in there, that I left city of Pacifica, and the following city councils decided that that was not for Pacifica. We did not want to become a city of high density, and therefore we would cut down, through the hillside protection ordinances, cut down the number of homes that would ultimately be developed, so that we would not go beyond the 45,000 mark in all probability.
Karl, after your colorful career here in the 60s, then you took more government positions and actually started doing your consulting, if you will, or employment overseas. You want to bring us up to date on how you spent that time?
I served in Pacific for nearly 9 years, and then wanted a little change of atmosphere. And my family, I think, agreed that it would be a nice move to make. And I wanted to stay in the field of public administration, so I joined the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is part of the State Department, and was appointed to that. And then I was sent, after training in Chicago and back east, I was sent to Vietnam for the first 5 years. So I served for 5 years in Vietnam, and then that was followed by tours of duty in a couple of other countries.
Well, focusing on Vietnam for a minute, and if you can see this map, if we're holding it upright, I don't expect the audience to recognize all the pronunciations of the names in Vietnamese. And apparently you didn't speak too much of that language.
I didn't speak Vietnamese, but I picked up the names of all the areas that I was concerned with. For orientation, this is the South China Sea here, and here is Cambodia, and here is Saigon in the middle of the area where I served. This was called 3 Corps, the 3rd Military Zone. So you have I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and 4 Corps down on the Delta. And I was responsible for working with government officials in 11 provinces that surrounded Saigon. And it required traveling to those provinces under all kinds of conditions and trying to work with them to solve problems.
Well, you made comments earlier to your family. You're doing this. Where's your family?
Well, initially, my family waited a year behind while we made arrangements to sell the house or to rent the house. And then my wife, Eileen, and the family, and that was my son and daughter, went over to Thailand. And they lived for a year in Bangkok, and then went down the Malay Peninsula to Malaysia, and lived on the island of Penang on the Malacca Strait. And every 5 weeks or so I was able to visit them by plane, and on a couple of occasions my wife was able to visit me in Saigon. So we weren't completely cut off, but that was the way we could handle it.
And did you add to your family in Malaysia?
And what?
Add to your family in Malaysia? Did you
No, we just had one son and one daughter.
Okay, and but they met with you for a while there.
Yeah.
You also had an assignment in Indonesia.
And then, well, we followed after Malaysia and after Vietnam. We went to the Philippines, where we were all together again, and resided in Manila and in Baguio. And we were there for the next 5 years, and then followed the 5 years in Indonesia. And then after 15 years overseas, I retired from the Foreign Service and returned to the States.
A moment on Indonesia, they had the terrible weather problems there a couple of years ago. Was that part of the area you had been to?
That was an area that I was covering. I had a project in northern Sumatra, including the province of Aceh, which was the hardest hit in this recent earthquake and tsunami. And I visited several times the very city, Banda Aceh, up on the northern tip of Sumatra, which was largely wiped out by the earthquake and the tsunami that followed.
Okay, then the decision to come back to California, specifically to Pacifica, because you had the home here, might as well.
Back to the same place where we'd started, and we tried to sell it before we went overseas. It wouldn't sell, so we finally rented it for the next 15 years. It worked out fine.
Okay, now when you came back here, though, you were theoretically retired from your profession, but not retired from activity, and particularly civic activity.
I got involved in several things. One of them was served as one of the charter organizers of Pacificans Care, and for about 8 years, I worked on that with that organization. It's still going and still functioning very well here in Pacifica and carrying out a good role. And then I became active with the Historical Society.
You helped to found it, did you not?
Yes, to put together the 501c3 papers, which are the basis for funding much of what the society is doing.
And others, either the Lions or Kiwanis or Rotary, any of those attract you at that time?
I was a charter member of the Rotary Club, which we set up in Pacifica, and it too is still functioning and very, very well here.
Some famous county managers, particularly in St. Louis and Baltimore, went on to higher office and went on to mayors or governors of their state and so on. What about Karl Baldwin?
Karl Baldwin stayed comfortably in retirement.
No elected office?
I have not gone for any kind of elected office, but I have remained active and doing such things as joining through the Historical Society to work on the Little Brown Church.
Well, that takes a lot of your time now, and let's talk about the Little Brown Church, exactly what it was and what it means to you now. What was it originally? In fact, we'll show the picture so no one should be surprised. 1910 building.
Right. Well, this is a good picture of the building with a horse and carriage in front of it, and it doesn't look like it's in very good shape at that stage, but it was brought up to right up to I guess then current building codes, and from 1910 on served as a church up to the point where finally the city took it over as a police department. And for 18 years this was the police headquarters for the city of Pacifica. And then when the city of Pacifica went to another police headquarters building, the Little Brown Church was left sitting there and in very poor condition. It was at that point that the Historical Society took on the responsibility of rehabilitating the church and preserving it. And to preserve it and to protect it, we even had to go through an election.
Well, let's come back to the election moment. I'd just like to reflect, because every time I mention the Little Brown Church, not as a building, but as a religious institution in the 40s and 50s, the name of Reverend Harkins comes back. Oh. Was he around when you were around?
He was here when I was here, and Reverend Harkins ran the church at the time I was here. We solved problems because we were on the same parcel of land immediately.
I mean, the city was on the same parcel as the Little Brown Church.
So we had to work out parking problems between us, and that was all done very peaceably. But he was an active pastor while I was there.
The address is 1850 Francisco, and it's on the corner of what street?
Salada Avenue, and just up the block from the Salada Hotel, which still stands on Palmetto Avenue.
Let's talk back to the Salada Hotel. Let's go back to before there was a Little Brown Church, or just when it was become. What year, do you know what year this was taken?
Well, I guess
Can
this
you tell
is
from
showing,
anything in
showing
there?
about 1910, and this picture shows the railroad going through Pacifica.
That's
Here's
the Ocean Shore Railroad connecting from
Ocean
San
Shore
Francisco
Railroad.
south.
Heading down towards Santa Cruz.
Right, never
And
got there.
Never got there, but it got as far as Tunitas Creek. And here it is at the station, steaming in what is now Pacifica. The Little Brown Church doesn't show up on this because there's a hill in between. Here's the Salada Hotel, which is just a block down from the church. And these old homes, several of them are still standing, including Anderson's store. So the historical part of this picture really brings out the early development of the coast.
Now, in 2002, the voters had to decide whether or not the city could, I shouldn't say dump it, but tear it down or use it for
Right.
something else. And the Historical Society, under your leadership, came up with a petition, a ballot, and finally saved the church from the wrecking ball. Okay? Now, at that point, what's been happening since in the remaining minute or two?
Once the citizens decided that the church should stay where it was and should remain indefinitely on its present parcel, it was then a matter of trying to figure out what should be done to make the plans and to get improvements going. We decided that it would be necessary to employ an architect to make plans for extensive renovation and preservation of the building. And that's essentially where we are today. We have a complete set of plans, and they call for a new roof and everything, and we're just finished the roof as stage one of the rehabilitation.
And I'll show you a picture of some of your current members of your committee that are working on this. You're raising funds to help restore this, maybe a projection of 2010. May be open to the public as a museum, an event center. Is that the plan itself?
This is the Little Brown Church Preservation Committee, a committee of hardworking people who have stuck together for 5 years it's been nearly 6 years now, to put this project together and to stand behind it.
Okay, we have to close now, Karl. I hope we got as much in as we can,
Sure.
but people can still contact you through the Little Brown Church or call Baldwin's in the phone book. That wraps up the show. I just want you all to remember that lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time.